Starting our service here just in a couple of minutes. If you got your cell phones with you, make sure they're on off and vibrate or some sign, something like that. If you need water, now's the time to go get it before we get started. Student routing for anybody, if anybody's not covered. The other chapels open, everything's on TV. You can see it, you can hear it, everything's over there in the other room. So you might have to sit over there.
Everything so much better wherever I someone who cared this much for me, someone who understands yet loves me through it all. This kind of love is only seen in fairy tales and make believe, but my life's safety net, you're always there to catch me when I fall. You're a friend of mine for as long as there is forever. Hand in hand, there's no mountain we can't climb. You're one of a kind who makes everything so much better. Wherever I am, you'll always be this friend of mine. What a friend we have in Jesus, this friend of mine. Isaac Sonny Welch, Jr. Isaac Sonny Welch, Jr., age 82, of Lancaster, passed away at his home on Monday, June 22nd, 2020. Sonny was born in Woodford County to the late Isaac and Martha Susan Wilson Welch. He was retired heavy equipment operator. He is survived by his loving wife, May Isaacs Welch, 2 sons, Mike Sandy Corder Welch and Mark Loretta Welch, 1 brother, Ed Welch, 1 sister, Fannie Mae Powell, 2 grandchildren, Cheyenne Nunn and Emily Welch, and 1 great-grandson, Bennett Nunn. In addition to his parents, he was also preceded in death by 1 brother, Claude Ray Welch, and 1 sister, Phyllis Morse. May this song's for you. May's like my mother. This is an awesome thing. But there's one more that's awesome above all of us, and that's Jesus. And He's the lighthouse. And He's the one that's always standing waiting and ready for us. No matter what kind of shape we're in or what we're going through, He's always right there waiting. And all we got to do is just ask Him. There's a lighthouse on the hillside that overlooks life's sea. When I'm tossed, it sends out a light that I might see. And the light that shines in darkness now will safely lead us on. And if it wasn't for the lighthouse, I know my ship would sail no more. And I thank God for the lighthouse. I owe my life to Him. don't sail this way anymore. There's no use of hanging around. But then my mind goes back to that stormy night when just in time, oh, I saw the light on that old lighthouse, and he's still standing up there on the hill. And I thank God for the lighthouse. I owe my life to him, for Jesus is the lighthouse. From the rocks of sin, he has shown a light around me that I clearly see. And if it wasn't for the lighthouse, tell me where would this ship be? And if it wasn't for the lighthouse, tell me where would this ship be?
May, we've come to the limit of life, and you've done well. You know, we take those wedding vows, May. You've been very blessed. You've got two fine sons, respectable men, two fine daughter-in-laws, two fine grandchildren, good in-laws, good people. May, that's about as good as we're promised in this life. And a long time ago, not so long in some ways, but a long time ago, you promised to be faithful to him till death. May Welch, you've done that. You've been faithful to death. And I know that you've struggled as of late. You've had your hands full. The whole family has. But God has seen us through it, children. He's seen us through it. And this man, this is only it's only that part of the person that came forth from the earth that must return to it. It is God's divine plan for us. The portion between that first breath and that last one, we inhale for the first time and we exhale for the last time. Between those two events, thousands of different circumstances, hundreds of different opportunities, just the possibilities are endless. And yet, in the midst of all of that, my dear friends, God stands and looks into our hearts and into our lives and longs to have a relationship that is not only one that's valid, but one that has substance. You know, we can all have a religious experience. A religious experience will see you through. You must have a relationship. One that is solid. One that allows you to find forgiveness when you're weak and strength when you're completely overcome, and faith when you don't know what tomorrow may hold. I'll say this about Sonny. I never saw anything probably ever presented about a person that better spoke of his true nature made than the pictures and the photographs that I stood back there and looked at. And I just wanted to soak it all up. There was a young Sonny. I didn't know his name was Ike for a long time. There was a young Sonny, and it's no wonder Sonny had an eye for you, May. You was as pretty as you could be. And there they sat together, and I looked down through those pictures as they scrolled across that screen. A stringer of crappie that he just barely could hold long enough, I suppose, for him to take the picture. And coyotes and deers and turkeys and pictures of May and Sonny out at daylight and the sun just coming up over the lake. Many times that Sonny they'd make their, I call it their annual pilgrimage to Florida. And I couldn't wait to see him come back home because I wanted to find out who'd actually caught more fish. And I'd say, Sonny, did you have a good trip? And he'd go, he'd just grin from ear to ear. He just loved it. It was just who he was. And he'd talk about that, and I'd lean over and always hug May, kiss her on the cheek, and May say, I caught more than Sonny did, Sonny. Don't like it. It's a pretty classic of the two of them. You couldn't say his name without having her said. It's always just been Sonny and May. Sonny and May said this because May spoke for Sonny, and Sonny backed May up. And May shoots, I know I'm not preaching to the choir here. I know that you guys know May's a straight shooter before she says it. And they have, Sonny and May have been not just members of Sand Gap Christian Church. They have become, in many ways, like its soul. Every Sunday morning for the longest time, we always have kind of like what most people would call a meet and greet, even though we're just family. And everybody will get up and shake hands and talk to one another. I stand there in the pulpit and I'm waiting for all that to get done before I can start. And lots of times I just have to start because they won't get done. And everybody would make their way over to speak to Sonny. Everybody always made their way. They were just rank and file right down the road. And May talking to all of them and just tell them. And you can just watch and see when people are enjoying someone's company. You know what I mean? You can tell because you can see actions sometimes speak so much louder than words. I mean, people just get tickled all over. They talk to May and they talk to Sonny and all about those things, and then the service would get started. Sonny always led the church in prayer for communion. He really knew how to pray. I was standing back in the back there, and Brother Donnie was telling me, he said, I'm sure we're going to miss Sonny. He said he was the best hand to pray, and Brother Jerry said the same thing about him. Everybody just loved to hear him talk to God. That kind of relationship is not one that you develop really quick. We'd all like to think we know God really personal. But when you're talking to him like he's way off, and there's a difference when you're talking to him like he's standing right next to you. Like you've talked to him before. You've had conversations and you've had experiences with him before. Sonny was that kind of person. It seemed like he just knew him so well. And Sonny has been not only a solid, him and May have just, I couldn't have, and I can safely say this, I couldn't have held my own self together at times if I hadn't had. You think pastors are all full of confidence, you're wrong. It's difficult not to become emotionally attached. It's difficult not to be hurt. It's difficult not to be feel lonesome at times, and it's hard to maintain personal friendships between the pulpit and the pew. But Sonny and May have been both father and mother and best friends to me, and I cannot, May, thank you enough. I used to go down and visit with May and Sonny before they'd head to Florida. And May would make that what I call cowboy coffee. Now you may not be familiar with that. That's when you go to and put your water in your pot and you don't measure it. You just run it. You kind of feel the weight of it. And then you go to your coffee supply and you start dipping it in until it looks right. You're not exactly measuring it. And you set that on a hot burner and you let it come to a full boil. And after it comes to a full boil, you kind of turn it down or set it off the stove for a little while and let them grounds settle out in the bottom. Now that's real coffee. And Mae would make that real coffee for me, and I'd go down there and me and Mae drink that coffee and talk and laugh, and then we'd have prayer. Then I'd go home and go to sleep about 3 o'clock in the morning. Mae's coffee was plenty potent. It had strength to it. Today, friends, we need to acknowledge one thing. We are all here full of breath, of relatively good health. But we will pass this way. We will. Maybe we'll have time to plan. Maybe the good Lord will give us, like Hezekiah and Sonny Welch, will give us 20 or 30 more years when doctors have given us no hope. Maybe we'll have a second opportunity to make an amends in life. Maybe we will not. But there is one thing that is guaranteed. If we came into this life, we will leave it. The important thing is what happens between the first breath and the last one. Make them count. There is a passage of Scripture in 2 Timothy that Paul wrote to Timothy. He wrote 1 and 2 Timothy and the book of Titus from prison. And just as he finished both those books to those 2 young evangelists, Paul was taken out and beheaded. It is his last, you might say, his last expression for the hope of the many churches that had been opened and established by that great apostle. And he said this to Timothy, and it was carried not only to Timothy, and Timothy afterwards saw that these letters were published to every church, because he saw within them that Paul had made a statement here, not just on theology, but on being practical. And that's what people need to be as Christians, practical. Sonny Welch was a practical Christian. He wasn't no great theologian or no great philosopher. He didn't claim to have an abundance of anything. He was just practical about everything, and he had the greatest wisdom in being practical, because everything was like something he saw in nature. But Paul says this to Timothy. He says, it is a faithful saying, for if we be dead with him, we shall also live with him. If we suffer, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he also will deny us. If we believe not, yet he abideth faithful. He cannot deny. Christian relationship that submits to sickness, that submits to a body that grows old and gets feeble, that submits to God's ultimate and final destiny for every man and woman that walks upon the face of the earth. My dear friends, we're young once and then we age. And as we need people who have the solid experience and the spiritual fortitude and the relationship with Christ Jesus that can give an answer and a response that have some kind of a meaning to coming generations. Sonny Welch was capable of doing that. Now, like all other pastors, I'm going to do something today that I rarely ever do outside the church house. In the church house, everybody knows me, and I can be pretty honest, fairly honest, but complete honesty at a funeral. Let me tell you this. Like every church, we have been through ups and downs. We've been through good times, hard times, and even in times when we were doing things by faith, because we had to operate by faith, because they certainly wasn't enough money to justify what we were endeavoring to do. Sonny Welch kept the peace. Everybody's smiling, so I'll take that as a unanimous amen. The people you love most is the people you want to choke. They're the ones that know how to push all the right buttons. They know how to say every word, and they say it on purpose, and they intend to upset you. They intend to. But love overcomes that. But nevertheless, differences of opinion about a variety of different things, and I'm not exactly, as a man outside of the pulpit, outside of other things, I'm fairly independent-minded. I think independently. And during the construction process, I had a vision for what I've seen that it could be, and sometimes there was differences of opinion, and Sonny would bring peace to the whole situation every time. He just could do it. But he had spent his life on the job sites, in construction, dealing with various kinds of men of different demeanor. Some of them quick-tempered, and some of them pretty lackadaisical, I suppose. And he was able to get the same work out of the high-strung and the same work out of those that wouldn't so work. Mike shared with me once about working with his dad. He spent all of his life working around him and with him. They disagreed a lot, like fathers and sons do. I think that's pretty typical. I don't think there's a thing wrong with that. I think it's what dads do with their boys. And Mike said, Daddy always put me on the worst equipment there was. Said it'd be a falling apart. Said you couldn't even keep the pins in the equipment. Said you go to grease it, and the grease is falling off of the alumite instead of going into the joint where it should. And so that's what Daddy put me on, and said expected me to turn out just as much work or more than anybody else on the job. Well, friends, I want you to know Sonny Welch was not exactly highly educated, but Sonny Welch was highly intelligent. And we have many roads, and there's many industrial sites across this state that Sonny Welch was a part of, and that brilliance come out. And he was there with good men. Most of his companions and friends have gone this way ahead of him, and a few remain that will follow him. And we too will follow. What matters is what happens between that first breath and that last one. Life is supposed to be difficult. Life is supposed to be full of challenge. If it wasn't difficult, and if it wasn't a challenge, then what good reason could there be for living? There's supposed to be controversy. There's supposed to be differences of understanding and of opinion. And until we discover and realize that in that difference between us, there exists one thing that changes the whole schematic and the whole scope of that life, yours and mine. The ability and the God-given command to love one another. And love will overcome the differences. Love will forgive, and love will not envy, and love will not boast, and love will not brag. Love just patches it up. That's what's important. Now, Sonny and his brothers lost their mother quite young. And I'm going to say this about things that happen. Only God could know the answer to such questions about why. But God saw that there was wisdom in his choices.